Goblin launch detected.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. In today's game, Chris, Eric, and Reese are rejoining me, with Chris playing his Aminatou deck. He keeps Sea of Clouds, Marsh Flats, Recruiter of the Guards, Caves of Koilos, Wishclaw Talisman, Hostage Taker, and Soul Herder. Eric is still playing his Tom Bombadil deck, keeping Command Tower, Forest, 3 Visits, Satyr Enchanter, Verduran Enchantress, Shieldred, and the Horus Heresy. I'm still playing my older version of Otrimi, keeping Stormchaser Drake, Clearwater Pathway, Dreamtail Heron, Overgrown Tomb, Mind Leecher, Cultivate, and Talisman of Dominance. Last but not least, Reese is playing Malcolm and Nadier, keeping Saltmarsh, Charcoal Diamond, Mere Battlesphere, Mistvault Bridge, Siren Stormtamer, Soul Ring, and a Sky Diamond. Chris wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Marsh Flats, cracking it and losing 1 to go and find Godless Shrine. Eric just plays a Command Tower. I drop an Overgrown Tomb tapped. Reese just plays a tapped Salt Marsh. Chris draws and plays Sea of Clouds. He then casts Wishclaw Talisman and passes. Eric's got a Forest and pays 2 for 3 visits, going to find Spar's headquarters as he passes. I play a Clearwater Pathway and then Talisman of Dominance. Reese draws and plays a Mistvault Bridge, which comes in tapped. He casts Soul Ring and then an Arcane Signet, and then taps the Arcane Signet into a Siren Stormtamer. He passes after that. Chris draws and plays an island. He plays out Skyclave Apparition, exiling Reese's Soul Ring as it enters, and passes. Eric draws and plays Nature's Lore, going to find Ziator's Proving Ground as he passes. I draw and play Rogue's Passage. I cast Cultivate to find a basic for the field and 1 for my hand, and pass. Reese draws and plays Malcolm, and then goes to combat. He swings the Siren Stormtamer at Chris, dealing 1 and making a treasure, and then passing turn. Chris has a Caves of Koilos for turn, and plays his own Soul Ring. He then casts a Soul Herder, and moves to combat. He swings the Apparition at Eric to deal 2, and then moves to his end step. The Soul Herder flickers the Apparition, which gives Reese a 1/1 token, and then as it comes back, exiles my Talisman of Dominance. After that, Chris passes. Eric draws, plays out Satyr Enchanter, and passes to me. I've got an island for turn, and cast one of the best mutate targets, Tusky, and pass to Reese. Reese plays a Sword of the Animist, and then cracks his treasures to equip it onto the Siren Stormtamer. Moving to combat, he swings the Stormtamer at me and Malcolm at Chris. We both take the hits, with Reese making 2 treasure tokens, and he goes to find a basic to put into play as well. With all that ramp done, Reese passes turn. Chris draws and plays an island. He then plays out Hostage Taker, and as it comes in, exiles Reese's Arcane Signet. He then casts Recruiter of the Guard, and goes to find a Muldrifter. Moving to his end step, Soul Herder flickers the Skyclave Apparition again, and I get a 2/2 token, and then it comes back, exiling Eric's Satyr Enchanter. With nothing else, Chris passes. Eric draws and plays a Verduran Enchantress, but still missing a land drop, has to pass. I've got Sanctum of Eternity for turn, and I then mutate a Dreamtail Heron onto Tusky, drawing a card. I then go to combat and swing my Tusky stack at Chris, and the Spirit token at Eric, drawing more cards from Tusky as they connect. In my post-combat main phase, I play a Stormchaser Drake and pass. Reese has got an island for turn, and then goes to combat. He swings Malcolm and the Siren Stormtamer at Chris, who both connect, but Reese only makes 1 treasure token, but he does get to find a land from the Sword of the Animist. In his post-combat main phase,
Reese then plays Nadier and passes. Chris draws and plays an Arcane Signet from under the Hostage Taker. He then plays a Muldrifter and draws 2 as it enters. Going to combat, the Soul Herder goes at Reese, and Reese chumps with his 1/1 Spirit. Going to his end step, Chris strikes a deal with Reese to avoid attacks for a turn by not exiling his stuff, and Chris then flickers the Hostage Taker and exiles my Dreamtail Heron stack. With nothing else, he passes. Eric draws and plays a Plains, finally hitting a land drop. He plays out Shuldred, and each of us sacrifice a non-token creature. With nothing else, Eric passes. I draw and play an Underground River, and then mutate Mind Leecher onto the Spirit token. I exile the top card from each opponent face down, and then move to combat. I swing the Mind Leecher at Chris for 5, which he takes, and I pass after that. Reese draws and plays an Urza Saga, and then equips the sword onto Nadier. Moving to combat, he swings Malcolm at Eric and Nadier at Chris, getting to land off the sword trigger. They then both take their hits, with Reese getting a treasure token. In his post-combat main phase, Reese then cracks 2 treasures to play Shimmer Dragon, and he also gets to put 2 +1/+1 counters onto Nadier from the tokens leaving play. With nothing else, he passes. Chris draws, playing a Vault of Champion as his lands return. He then casts Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, and then casts a Clever Impersonator as a copy of Shuldred, making everyone sacrifice 2 creatures instead of 1. Chris then goes to combat, swinging the Muldrifter and Hostage Taker at me, while the Soul Herder goes at Eric. We both take our beats, and during his end step, Chris then flickers Muldrifter, drawing 4 as it re-enters. Eric draws, playing out Goldberry, and then plays a Mess Enchantress, but sadly, with nothing else, has to pass. I draw and play a Scoot Swarm, and then play a land, but sadly, Elish Norn blanks my landfall trigger. I then cast Gillenra and pass to Reese. Reese draws, playing out a Sky Diamond, then a Charcoal Diamond, and then a Talisman of Dominance. He equips the Sword of the Animus to the Shimmer Dragon, and moves to combat. He swings the Hexproof Dragon at Chris, who jumps with the Muldrifter, but Reese still gets to find a basic at least. With nothing else, he passes. Chris draws and plays a Mystic Gate. He then plays Aminatou and activates the Wishclaw Talisman, donating it to Eric to tutor for a card. He then plays out Gonti and gets 2 Enter the Battlefield triggers, picking 1 for Reese and 1 for Eric, getting a card from each of their top 4. Chris then down-ticks Aminatou and flickers his Wishclaw Talisman back under his control, and then goes to combat. He swings the Soul Herder and Hostage Taker at me, Elish Norn at Reese, and the Shuldred clone at Eric. I chump the Soul Herder with the Scoot Swarm, and no one else declares any blocks. After damage is dealt, Chris then flickers the Clever Impersonator on his end step, and as it comes back, has it come in as a copy of the Shimmer Dragon, passing after that. Eric draws and plays a Plains. He plays the Horus Heresy, and takes Chris's Soul Herder and an Elf token from Reese. With nothing else, he passes. I draw and mutate Auspicious Starrix onto Gillenra, which flips into a Souvenir Snatcher and puts it into play. With nothing else, I have to pass. Reese draws, and Urza Sagas go off, going into his library to tutor for a Skull Clamp and put it to field. He then clamps 2 tokens to draw 4, and plays an island. He then clamps 2 more tokens to draw 4 more cards. He follows up by using Rapid Hybridization and targets the Hostage Taker, which, as it dies, gives me back my Tusky and Heron. And then Reese plays a Viscera Seer and an Academy Manufactor. He then wraps it up with an Ashnod's Altar and passes. During his end step, Chris casts a Mystical Tutor and puts Counterspell on top of his library. Chris draws his Counterspell and activates Wishclaw Talisman, tutoring for another card. Chris then flickers the Talisman with Aminatou after donating it, and Eric responds by sending a message and taking a counter off of it with Goldberry. The Talisman then re-enters with 3 counters again, and Chris activates it again to tutor for another card. He then plays out an Altar of the Brood and a Spark Double, which enters as a copy of Aminatou. This has us all milling 2 cards, and between the 2 Aminatou copies, Chris is able to flicker them infinitely to mill out his opponents and win the game. Game review time. This game was 59 minutes exactly, which is kind of weird. Unfortunately, I'm still very much congested and I'm starting to think I have some kind of infection, but we're going to power through this and then I'm going to go to sleep. Today's game was a great example of how early game disruption can really mess up people's plan, and you add into the fact that you keep getting to do it, makes it even harder. I would not have put money on Chris winning this game considering his opening hand, despite the fact that he had tutors. He didn't have a lot going on. That Sky of Clave Apparition and Soul Herder combo though was beautiful, and it pretty much took everyone off their fast mana rocks early on. Couple that with the fact that he seemed to draw into the Hostage Taker by late game, he was able to basically control whatever problematic cards were on the field. Even with the combined attacks of all 3 of us, he still managed to stabilize, and once he had Elish Norn out, I'm pretty sure the game was over. Eric's Tom Bombadil deck didn't really do a whole heck of a lot, and he only cast 1 Saga. The Horus Heresy is a very good one, but if you're only casting 1 and it's like turn 8, you're not really doing Tom Bombadil, unfortunately. Otrimi continues to show just how much I need to have hexproof at all times, because any kind of targeted exile or removal just shuts down my play. Even that shouldered really put me back far, and I need to find better ways of having tokens to be able to A, mutate onto, and B, sacrifice should the need arise. Reese has apparently 6,000 Dimir decks, which explains why he's playing something like Salt Marsh in his lands. Beyond that, I think he had a pretty decent start, it just seemed like he was lacking any kind of finisher. He was able to get a lot of tokens with Nadier, but unfortunately all they were really good for was Skullclamp fodder to draw him into basically nothing.
This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.